You're listening to the Valley Current.
As we all know, or should know, the leading authority on this virus and the leading Center for Accurate Messaging about this virus and its behavior and its treatment and public health policies. So you've got to give Tony a lot of credit. In addition to being his chief health advisor to the president, he's still also the director of the National Institute of Infectious Diseases. And it's difficult for me to understand how he's managing all these responsibilities unless they've beefed up his staff in both positions to the extent that he can do what he is doing now so successfully.
I mean, I would think at some level there's so many conflicting burdens to give TV appearances, radio appearances, consultation with the president and with others.
And keeping up with the worldwide activity of the virus.
Right.
And that's very time consuming. That's why I say he must have a very good staff of people who keep him advised and tailor what they're learning to a few sentences so he can digest all of this and incorporate it in his messages.
Right. Because he's gotten criticized recently. People said he flip-flopped on whether people needed to wear masks, didn't need to wear masks, masks outside, no masks outside. I can tell you that, there are certain people in Florida that won't wear a mask at all, inside, outside. And then there are others who are super cautious, even when vaccinated, who will absolutely wear masks everywhere and will avoid congregating in any place that there isn't a full 6 to 10 feet of distance. And obviously the courts are pretty much maintaining that view. California, I think, is even more respectful of that view than, say, Florida is. That may be just a function of the politics of the two different states. But in general, when you think about what we're learning from India, do you think the United States is going to get a little more religion about the second wave potential being as dynamic and as fast, with having the velocity that it seems to have had in India? Or do you think, we just don't necessarily focus on this stuff as though it's ever going to be something to worry about?
Well, I have to confess to my continuing pessimism for the following reason. I think a lot of liberal thinkers and a lot of Democrats felt that when Biden became president and Trump disappeared into Florida, that all of the nasty things that were done during the Trump administration, and I say that with full understanding of what that word means, that when Trump returned to Florida, Biden took over, things would change in the Republican Party, and we would have more sensible people beginning to express themselves as Republicans, as conservatives, but not as deniers of the truth and of people who are now fabricating stories of such extraordinary, bizarre nature that it's hard to understand why these Republican Trump supporters still maintain the positions that they had in the past. And if they don't change, if that whole mass of people and the 70 some odd million people who voted for Trump during the last election still believe what they then believed, there's little hope for change. There's very little hope for change. It reminds me of the Holocaust during the Second World War. One would think that after it became national policy of the Nazis to exterminate the Jewish population and Gypsy population and other populations in Europe on an industrial scale, that after the world learned about that anti-Semitism would have disappeared, that hatred of Gypsies and the other classes of people that the Nazis tried to exterminate, that hatred of those people would also disappear. It has not disappeared. If anything, it's become greater in popularity or in occurrence. So again, it's painful for me to be so pessimistic, but having lived through these periods and having made the observations that I've just made, I'm not optimistic about the kinds of improvements that I think you and I would like to see.
Yeah, I have to say I'm sort of in the camp with you that in general, we tend to be tribal. And so what happens in India will probably be viewed as that's their problem, not ours. What happens in Brazil will be, yeah, that's their problem, that's not ours. And the light bulb will only start to go off as stuff happens in the US that only gets explained by things like, hey, there's a huge Brazilian population in Miami, and those people visit with each other. And of course, there's a huge Indian population in New York and in other big cities, in San Francisco and elsewhere, and Los Angeles. So it's going to be one of these situations where you have to wonder, how do you fashion sort of a defense to what seems like almost an inevitable consequence of the world operating in the way it operates, even as the stock market continues to rise and affluence continues to suggest that it's present all over. It's hard to sort of say it really is an affluent planet. It may be there are pockets of affluence, but the planet itself seems to be in big trouble, if anything.
Well, the belief by so many people today that the pandemic problem as it exists in India, Brazil, and other countries is of no concern of the United States, because we are on the way, hopefully, of solving the problem domestically. Again, reminds me of past experiences with people called isolationists. We had in this country major political figures in the House and the Senate, and even in some of the administrations, who said we have two huge oceans on either side of the United States. Let's not get involved with the affairs of any other country on the planet, because we've got that kind of protection. And these isolationists held forth and dictated policy for years and years. And after they learned that that policy was wrong, did they ever admit it? No. The change did occur because of various events like air travel and the things that happened that made the world smaller than it was at that time and made the two ocean defense of this country a joke. Those kinds of things don't happen very often, but the people who were isolationists exist today in respect to their belief that helping India and China and Russia and any other country on the planet to solve this pandemic is their problem and not ours. So we have another iteration of isolationism in a different form. And who are these people? What are their political leanings? I'm not going to say it because I think that you and our viewers will know who they are as a class. So, Jack?
Yeah, that's always been viewed as a bit of a strength of the United States, that it has these oceans surrounding it, but in a way that we are kind of borderless it to some degree. I mean, it's
so they learned that very quickly when the Japanese balloons flew over the Pacific, dropped down in some of the northern mid states of the United States, exploded and caused fires, and I think killed one or two people. They also learned it wasn't true when Japanese submarines were seen off Manhattan Island, and when cargo ships carrying war material to Britain were torpedoed within 50 miles of the east coast of the United States. So that's when they became alive to some extent, but never admitted that their policy of isolationism gave rise to those actions that could have been prevented if they had realized that this country is not isolated, that it must interact with other countries. Thankfully, that ultimately happened, but at very great cost.
At a very high cost. I agree with you. And you properly added to the list of relevant dates that started with 1492 and jumped around to 1776. And then to 2020, as those were the three most important dates to ever impact the United States, America, and its independence, and now maybe the beginning of its collapse as a world leader, as of maybe even before 2020. You said, what about World War I and the devastation that caused? But I think coronavirus really has trumped just about every war, including both World War I and World War II, the Vietnam War, and the Civil War. I think someone's done those calculations, and it's sort of like we've trumped all of that with the number of deaths just in the United States alone. So it's quite a statement if you think about it. And I imagine India is doing the same reckoning at this point.
Yes. Well, the number of deaths in this country annually caused by COVID-19 have not yet reached levels of deaths caused by cardiovascular disease, stroke, and cancer.
Right. I sent you that chart from the New York Times yesterday, which
getting very close.
Yeah, which said that still those are the leading causes, although COVID-19 is catching up. It is sort of like the third leading cause of death in America and likely in the world as well. So it's sort of like if this super pandemic phase 2, some people are calling it phase 4. I don't know where phase 3 went, or phase 2 for that matter, or wave 4. But whatever wave it is, if it really repeats itself beyond India, it probably will trump both cancer as well as heart disease. Mm-hmm. So we're living in a strange time. Anyway, thanks very much, Len, for coming on to give us those insights about India. And I'm glad to hear you got the vaccine. I was a little worried that you were going to adhere to the view of standing pat until the end of the year. And I thought, man, you're not going to compare yourself to me on the 2 shots and then tell me what that second shot does to you, because I want to see if I'm a fluke of nature, because my wife, Dr. Lee Suter, she just was fine with the first and the second shot, just no impact at all, perfectly fine. Now, I think they may have given me a bigger vial of vaccine, but someone said, no, it's the same dose. It doesn't even matter whether you weigh half or twice or 3 times somebody else, you get the same dose, right?
0.3 milliliter.
That's it, right? It's not like you're a bigger guy, you get a bigger dose, right?
Well, it emphasizes how different we all are.
Right.
In respect to our biology and our reactions to health challenges. It's very difficult. Although in some cases, we can determine that a majority of people will react in one way or another, but we are all essentially different.
Right. Yeah.
Well, my reasons for delay, as I mentioned to you earlier in respect to getting the vaccine, was for 2 reasons. First was my experience in knowing that in past vaccination situations in this country, there infrequently occurred side effects that were not apparent during the phase 3 field trials of that vaccine, but became apparent when multiple millions of people became vaccinated. And that has indeed happened with this clot business for one of the vaccines. The second reason, which also turned out to be true, was my realization that mutants would occur and whether those mutants would be covered by the present vaccine. And my concern that a mutant might have arisen that would not be covered at all by the present vaccine. And the manufacturers of vaccines would have to retool and add antigens that consisted of the new mutation within the present vaccines, what we call bivalent vaccine. That is a vaccine like the MMR vaccine that consists of 3 different antigens and called a trivalent vaccine. I was concerned about that fact, which has happened, but not on the scale, thankfully, that it could have happened so far. So that's why I've taken the vaccine now.
Well, it sounds like you're doing the right thing to me.
Well, I hope so. But I want to know how you're doing, how your mother is doing, and whether you're happy where you are.
Well, I would say in reverse order that Florida has turned out to be a better place to sort of avoid what, to some degree, I sense is a lot of fear in California. Whenever I've talked to people in California, they seem to be in a lot more fear than people in Florida, which to me is always
fear of what?
Just fear of getting the virus, or fear of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or just even this just general fear that the world is not being as responsive to the needs of others. I think the people
if that has resulted in California being so far very effective in its handling of this.
Right. So the difference is, like, I feel like there's a lot more activities you can do here. And certainly I felt like they delivered the vaccination availability a lot faster than I could have ever gotten it in California. And I thought, that was pretty good. And they automated the way you did it online pretty well. Maybe that's true in California as well. I've learned a lot about my mom's life that I wouldn't know but for my spending the time here. So it's been an amazing experience of learning all the things about the way in which, when I left the household, which was at age 17, and, literally moved out of the house, moved into my own apartment, had roommates in college, and then from there was basically gone. I visited often enough, but you only got snippets of what was going on. So I've learned a lot of family history that I wouldn't know. And unfortunately, I arrived almost too late to recapture a lot of the memories, because my dad died 7 years ago. And I only wish I had been able to capture some of his memories, because my mom ended up throwing away a lot of his stuff and a lot of his photographs. And she just threw a lot of his, he had his own office. She just threw a lot of that stuff away, which I think is pretty sad when that happens, because you lose a lot of that history. We had many 8mm reels of film from when we were kids. And I've been looking around. My mom's like, I threw all that stuff away after your dad passed. I didn't want to look at any of that stuff. And I thought, man, that's like the whole history of our, growing up. And that was unfortunate to learn that occurred.
I'm sure your mother has benefited substantially by having her son with her during these times.
Well,
that's a huge plus for her.
Yeah, it's a huge plus, and I think it also sends the right message to my kids, although I don't know whether they'll take it, which is there is a better way of exiting with family than in a more sterile kind of assisted living or otherwise almost hospice approach, which is the way my brother ended up exiting, just because he was on
you might consider something that I did, and that is before my mother's death, when she was in her late 90s. When I visited her, each time I took my tape recorder and recorded all of the memories that she had from the time that she had her earliest memories as a child until the present time. And I think I had about 12 or 15 hours of recordings that I then had copied and distributed to all of her children and grandchildren. And I'm glad that I did that. I wish I had done that with Ruth, but I didn't. I do have, however, lots and lots of photographs of her from her childhood until her death. But that tape is very important, only because I know I have it. I haven't listened to them, but it gives me a great satisfaction to know that I have it.
Well, there's actually there's a company, I think it's in Germany, that creates holographic images and then links all those tapes to the holographic image and creates like a virtual personality that does actually do some interaction through AI of questions and answers and the like. And I think that's kind of what people are suggesting may represent the perpetual being state, where everything that you've done is recorded in some fashion and makes its way into some huge set of computers that can simulate your thought process to some degree.
That technology has been done with a group that has done it with Holocaust survivors.
Right. It was on 60 Minutes a few years ago.
It was really very effective, but probably very costly.
Very costly, but the price is coming down. The price is coming down. I mean, it's...
in any case, it's cheap to do audio recordings, and probably today not too expensive to actually do videography.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I've actually found the link, just so maybe we'll include it with this podcast of what you're referring to. This is a 60 Minutes archive about how you can be able to talk to a Holocaust survivor. This is it. I'll put the link on here. This is what it looks like. This was done 3 months ago, this one, but I think it built on some of the earlier ones. Yes. And it was actually very chilling to watch.
60 Minutes Rewind.
I'm just playing it for a second here.
Tonight, as the world struggles to contain and recover from the novel coronavirus, we offer a story we completed just before life changed so dramatically. It is a story of history, hope, survival, and resilience, which has its roots in another time when the world was convulsed by crisis, World War II. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the end of that war and the liberation of concentration camps across Europe.
I'm just skipping forward.
Hi, Aaron.
Hello.
Can I ask you some questions?
You can ask me anything you want, within reason.
Our interview with Holocaust survivor Aaron Elster, who spent 2 years of his childhood hidden in a neighbor's attic, was unlike any interview we have ever done. Aaron.
So they really did a good job. I thought.
Very well done.
Really well done. And you got to imagine that this is probably going to become more available even during the remainder of our respective lifetimes for those who really want it. So, for example, you have a lot of material. I mean, you have a ton of material about yourself. And, you know, that is something that from an interactive point of view would be extremely valuable for a university. And I don't see that the universities are picking up on this yet, but it seems like someone, in lieu of spending a lot of money doing other foolish endeavors, like maybe, you know, going to Mars and stuff like that, although I can understand why people think it's a great thing to go to Mars, but to capture the wisdom of a generation in a way that allows the next generation to probe in the fashion that 60 Minutes was suggesting, to me, would be a very valuable approach while the data is there to gather, because I can tell you the data does get lost. I mean, now it's in the cloud and maybe it's a lot more accessible, but when it's on a piece of media, people go through, and start throwing stuff away. They just ditch stuff to make room, and they don't think twice about what's been lost in the process. So
yes, well, I don't know what, I think I told you that I did about 15 or 20 hours of interviews for an organization in London when I was there over 2 consecutive summers, when I recorded what they wanted me to do, and that is the memories, all of my memories from my childhood to the present time. It's called webofstories.com.
Right, it's online. All your stuff is online. Yeah. I've seen it. It's very good.
The other thing that I've done is I've indicated to my children that upon my death, and I stipulated a specific sum of money to be given to a credible archivist to go through all of my materials in my office, garage area, and other storage areas to capture items of historical importance. And I do have a lot of that stuff, consisting, for example, of correspondence with many leading scientific figures like Jonas Salk and Albert Sabin and many other names that won't be as familiar to you as they would be to the scientific community, and photographs, documents, and hopefully that will all be stored in one of 2 or 3 archive areas that I have already named and specified to my children.
Right. I think they would start probably with the web of stories and then build around that. And
the archivist has to go through the physical papers and documents that I have here.
Right. No, there's a lot there. And the same thing is true for Dr. Walter Bortz, as you know, because he's got a ton of stuff as well. And he's also...
Have you heard from him lately? I rarely hear from him now.
Yeah, no, he's very much around, but I don't think he types on the computer very much anymore.
I don't get any messages from him.
No, and you have to almost make sure that you copy Gene Kennedy.
That's what I've been doing.
And then you might be lucky enough to get a reply. But I did see him the last time I was in California briefly for a case, and I did see him at his home, and he looked well, and Gene was there, and they both looked well. So I think everything is fine. But you know, in many ways, you could say eventually some company is going to make it more practical for people to deposit this information in a way that allows it to stay organized very effectively. So thank you, Len, for spending the time this afternoon. I really appreciate it. You look great.
Thank you for inviting me.
Of course.
Zach. As always, it's a pleasure to talk to you. I wish you well.
Okay.
Stay safe.
You too.
Regards to our mutual friends.
Let's give a round of applause to Pfizer, and I look forward to hearing about your second shot, and then hearing how well it goes, and then how it might or might not change the way you interact with others. I see it. Yeah. There you go. There it is. It's got your it's got your WI-38 Hayflick stuff right on it. So
that's the real Pfizer vaccine.
That's the real thing. Yeah, that's quite good. Thank you, Len. Have a good afternoon. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
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 You will. Bye-bye.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.